Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out to the Hudson Institute. I'm Patrick Cronin, Asia Pacific Security Chair, and today it's a great privilege to introduce Ambassador Shin-wha Lee, who's going to help us unravel this connection between human rights and denuclearization issues and North Korea. Human rights is often compartmentalized, separated, treated quite differently, sometimes as an afterthought to the nuclear problems. Today, I think we'll hear from Ambassador Lee that that's a mistake. These are connected issues, and they need to be dealt with holistically. You know, as South Korea's ambassador of international cooperation on North Korean human rights, Ambassador Lee has a very broad portfolio, and fortunately, she brings tremendous credentials to tackling these sort of complex issues. It's trying to understand the plight of ordinary North Koreans, and at the same time, keep in mind the fact that North Korea has unbridled nuclear ambitions that the Kim regime is using, and that really these issues are a matter for the whole world, not just, not just the region. Shin-wha Lee is a distinguished professor of political science and international relations at Korea University. Her scholarship on human security has been sharpened by a lot of practical experience, including as special advisor to UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, both on the Rwanda genocide inquiry and on peacekeeping. And Ambassador Lee has kindly agreed to make some opening remarks this morning, and then we'll sit down afterward, have a conversation, and answer some questions and answers. But please join me in welcoming Ambassador Shin-wha Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Patrick Cronin, for arranging this meeting for me. Well, I was asked by Patrick not only talking about human rights issues, though maybe I'll just talk about some North Korean issue in a broader context by touching upon what's my observation on those nuclear problems that we have been dominated by those issues. So my talk subject is mainly consists of like two components. On one hand, what's my thought on those denuclearization, if that's ever possible, should be. And on the other hand, of course, there's human rights issues mainly focus on security and the human rights abuses. First, I want to recall about this last August meeting on the Camp David meeting that regarded as a pretty historical history achievement when it comes to that fundamentally change the geopolitical landscape, at least of East Asia, because it elevated cooperation to near alliance levels among Korea, Japan, and the US by enabling shared intelligence and response training against North Korea nuclear and missile threats. Efforts were made to so-called institutionalizing this cooperation, but there are at least two concerns from the perspective of South Korea, both South Korean government and South Korean people, in my opinion. And first, South Korean society is highly divisive, both in terms of diplomacy and public sentiment. And that highlights the need for tangible and immediate rather than long-term benefits from this cooperation. So we have to, the present UN has to prove, this having a very tangible outcome for the Korean people. Otherwise, it will having always a conflictual thought. So for that, I think a more considerate and stronger US commitment to South Korea is necessary. Second concern is while the Camp David meeting seemed to focus on the nuclear and missile threat from North Korea, it was substantially aimed at, as we all know, countering China's expansionist policies. A robust tripartite cooperation among Korea, Japan, and US may further unify our own like-minded countries' efforts but at the very same time, what we call revisionist alliance, that is North Korea, China, Russia, will be also strengthened. It is serious because that also giving us some concern about the crisis over Taiwan, that having a significant, I would say, negative impact on the Korean security. With the recent Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict, the U.S. now finds it a very two-front warfare scenario that the U.S. sought to avoid. If a Taiwan crisis and further provocation from North Korea occur, I think this could lead to four fronts. These conflicts cannot be isolated, and with the likelihood of China's intervention in the Korean conflict being a matter of when rather than if. It's crucial to listen to these warnings and prepare very thoroughly. I think that's what U.S. and the Korea should do together. Because North Korea is attempting to exploit the current international turmoil and divisive and conflicting great power dynamics to destabilizing the international cooperation system. The regime has historically engaged in provocation at sea to create dilemmas for the U.S. and South Korea, and a full-scale war on the Korean Peninsula could lead to collapse of the North Korean regime. Kim Jong-un's emphasis on enhancing naval capability, particularly with Russia's help in developing a nuclear-powered submarine, could drastically alter the regional maritime security landscape, enabling provocations anywhere beyond the Korean Peninsula. This includes strategic strikes with submarine-launched ballistic missile and torpedo attacks on trade routes. So, imperative to develop countermeasures, particularly against North Korean nuclear-powered submarines, are necessary. From South Korean perspectives, the challenge is, while North Korea faces no constraints in acquiring nuclear fuel and enriching it, potentially lead to the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines soon, South Korea unfortunately faces numerous restrictions and lacking in this area. The official stance of the South Korean government, of course, is that it does not seek to change the status quo by force, but strives to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea and peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula through dialogue and cooperation. For that, U.S.-Korean alliance and the like-minded countries' consolidation is important. Okay, that's a beautiful scenario, but in reality, can we do that? And that indicate those forcibly repatriated are subject to the terrible situations until their death, because once you got in there, they say there are no chance for them to get out. The situation is accurately distressing for women with children in China, because most of those ladies, once they went to the China, they are subject to human trafficking or unwanted marriage, and they usually have kids with a Chinese husband or a Chinese man. But repatriation is only took place on her, right? So that repatriation also imposed a heart-breaking separation for both mothers and children. China's such action constitute a breach or breakup of the International Humanitarian Convention, including the UN Convention Against Torture, and then refugee laws, and of which China is a signatory as well. And also the international humanitarian law strictly prohibit the forced separation of the family members. With over 1,000 believed to be in Chinese detention and NGO reporting ongoing repatriation, or they are also subject to the risk of the forced repatriation, it is a matter of the time. So it is essential to collaborate with like-minded nations to ensure the safety of those repatriated on one hand, and to persuade China or enforce China to halt further forced repatriation. Here I have some dilemma. If we speak up, I think based on the history before, the China tends to make a further repatriation. For that, probably we need a quiet diplomacy, or we need a deliberate diplomacy. But how? So those are a dilemma we have to think about. But the sustained dialogue and partnership with allies and engagement with important states that does not necessarily share the values and norms with U.S. or Western cultures, but they still believe universal value of protection of human rights. Then we have to consolidating our like-minded countries' cooperation on one hand, but on the other hand, we have to making a similar efforts to communicate and engage with what I call swing state, so that we can just persuade China not to making a further repatriation. In diplomatic discourse, it has been emphasized that North Korea's military posturing and human rights abuses are intrinsically linked. Recent Security Council briefings at UN meetings has been open meeting, first time in 6 years, set up these issues as well. And two examples, let me just briefly mention. North Korea, the entire North Korean people require 5.5 to 5.8 million tons of food per year. And then usually 800,000 tons are the more required annually. But last year, North Korea fired 71 missiles. Even with a conservative estimate, the cost of those missile launch is equivalent to 1 million tons of the food. So if you're having a simple math, that means if they didn't fire that missiles, you can cover those 800,000 tons of shortage even with the surplus. So that underscores the regime's disregard for basic human needs for the sake of Kim Jong-un regime survival or regime security over the human security of its own people. Another critical issue I would like to talk about is human rights impact on North Korea's nuclear activities. The investigation into the causal link between nuclear testing and radiation exposure, I think we have to having a bit more study to produce a verifiable fact. But still, we have to think about there have been 6 nuclear tests since 2006. The operation of underground nuclear test and test site present a substantial radiation risk, although some argue that there was very tight closed, so there is a little chance for radiative exposure, but I personally believe it shouldn't be like that. But those substantial radiation risk is that affect local residents and also scientists who are involved in nuclear programs development, and the forced labor of workers and possibly the political prisoners as well. With the closure of the Yodok concentration camp in 2014 and nearly 30,000 political prisoners' fates remaining unknown, although they say they've been dispersed to here and there is a possibility at least some of them are in the Hwasong political prisoners camp that is called the number 16, that is pretty close to the nuclear test site. So the growing size of those camp, number 16, as indicated by the satellite imagery and testimonies from escapees, demands a thorough investigation into the forced labor practices within North Korea. This kind of complex issues requires an interdisciplinary and multifaceted approach, in my opinion, incorporating verifiable or credible fact and the concerted effort of policymakers, diplomats, and the security experts, medical doctors, and statisticians and scientists, all those people still working in an interdisciplinary manner to address the grave human rights violation in North Korea. Here I want to emphasize, over time, the United States and South Korea have engaged in extensive bilateral and multilateral cooperation in an attempt to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue over the 30 years. Yet, these efforts have been unsuccessful. Human rights issues are a significant vulnerability or Achilles heel for North Korean regime. Therefore, it is crucial for US and South Korea cooperation to establish and enforce a consistent and robust human rights policy toward North Korea that remains steadfast regardless of changes in the political leadership of any country involved. I think this is particularly relevant because both countries faces a US risk, that is the Trump risk, and also what they call, and then the South Korea's risk, that is the failure of the ruling parties in the coming April, the parliamentary elections. Well, I don't have no meaning to provoke the people who are supportive of Trump, by the way. So. Striking a balance between human rights and security concern is essential. Although security often takes precedence in practical terms, human rights must be a central component of any comprehensive policy on North Korea. So as an ambassador, as well as a professor, I would like to call for comprehensive approach to North Korea that both incorporate nuclear issues and the human rights issues at the same time. South Korea needs to foster political and social consensus and increase public awareness of these issues. The United States also has a significant role to play, and close cooperation with Korea is crucial. There should be efforts to raise public awareness through non-governmental organizations, academic circles, and specialists in the US. Conferences like this or seminar like this, I think is very important because that we can make some message toward the world. Lastly, there are several dilemmas to consider. Briefly, number one, increasing cooperation with countries that share a similar position is essential. However, as I mentioned earlier as well, it is also necessary to engage with countries that may not initially align with these perspectives. Because the stronger we consolidate each other among like-minded countries, I think the more chance for those people, those countries who share not the idea with us can consolidate their own cooperation or unity. Number two, addressing the issue of North Korean defector could provoke China, suggesting a need for very discreet and very calculative diplomacy. Relations among South Korea, China, Japan are also critical, as aggressive stances may lead to an increase in the further forced repatriation. Third, the Yoon government, as well as the Biden government, published the Indo-Pacific strategies, where we talk about values and norms and human rights and etc. But we have to remember, within the Indo-Pacific region, there are more authoritarian or totalitarian countries than democratic countries. So if South Korea or US outspoke stance on human rights, maybe those actions could be unfavorable to its strategic interest in the area, because that will provoke or raise some opposition from those countries in the Pacific region. So probably the US idea or US dream about to make Indo-Pacific is FOIP, like free open in the Pacific, might be just like a hollow dream, unless we are engaging with the very countries who reside in the Pacific. But once again, they are not free and they are not necessarily democratic. In summary, the US and South Korea must navigate these complexities within a firm, unified approach that consider the sensitive nature of the regime's politics and the overarching goal of addressing both the nuclear threat and the human rights abuses in North Korea. I have to tell you that South Korea and Japan, they will sitting in the Security Council next year together. I think that will be the wonderful opportunity for them to talk about not only North Korean issues, but also for global issues. So those upcoming year offers a very good momentum for these three countries to highlight North Korean human rights concern within the United Nations Security Council. But I have to tell you that internationalizing the North Korean human rights issue is very important, because their joint effort need to clarify, align with the broader global interest, showing that their actions are not solely for national gains, only for 3 of them, but also for the benefit of regional and global stability by providing global public goods. This effort should extend to actively addressing human rights and humanitarian crises and any kind of non-proliferation activities worldwide, thereby framing North Korean issues, including nuclear issues and human rights issues, within a global narrative of universal values and liberal international order. We lived based on that for almost over the 80 years. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Take a seat up there. Well, Shin-wha, thank you so much. Both as a professor and as an ambassador, you had tremendously important things to say, and yet you present them in such a mild-mannered, diplomatic way that an American audience may not quite grasp the gravity of what you were just saying. Whether we're talking about the potential for a 3 or 4 front war, a world in crisis, where North Korea takes advantage of the crisis that's already existing in the Middle East and Europe, or whether you're dealing with the incredible advances that the US, Korea, and Japan have made toward trying to work on a common set of issues, toward what's happening with China. And China's not very helpful international role, both on human rights, the repatriation of North Koreans back to North Korea in a certain death sentence, basically, but also interfering with maritime smuggling, sort of interdiction operations, the sanctions enforcement operations. So a lot of places that we could begin, either as professor or ambassador, maybe trying to combine these two, the human rights and the security and the nuclear issues together. Let me begin with your government's approach right now toward these issues, because I know you've said the United States needs to take a holistic approach, and you're absolutely right. We do need, the world needs really, this integrated approach to human rights and security. But your previous administration didn't have a lot of accountability when it came to North Korea's human rights issues, and before that, the whole idea behind a sunshine policy was the hope that sunshine would be this great antiseptic. But unfortunately, North Korea had a big supply of sunblock.
Although they don't talk about the term
sunshine anymore.
Policy.
No, I know that. I'm now dating myself. But even in the Moon administration, when they didn't talk about sunshine, they talked more practically, though, about divided families getting together. But they avoided the tough issues of human rights issues because they thought it would undermine diplomacy. So what is the strategy behind the Yoon administration's change on this? And is there really a hope? Because at the end of the day, every policy toward North Korea hasn't ended repression, and it hasn't really stopped the nuclear march from North Korea. So what is behind the current administration's thinking?
Let me begin with saying I have no intentions to criticizing previous government. No. Because it's no reason to promote the Yoon government. The reason is because over the past 1 year, it's been 1.5 years since Yoon government came to power, but for the first 1 year plus, they've been criticizing, the previous government's approach to North Korea, completely ignoring the human rights because of they want not to ruin denuclearization process on one hand, but also their priority was given to improving the inter-Korean relationship. But the Yoon governments in the earlier stage, they criticizing that was not successful at all, but that even make North Korea emboldened and spoiled, and then becoming a stronger nuclear armed state. So that Moon government's policy was completely failure and etc. Those issues was there over the first several months. But now I just feel like if we keep talking about those issues, that kind of brings some backlash on Yoon government. So Yoon government try not to criticize the Moon government anymore, but still they want to emphasizing the human rights issues are well, actually, what they call the value-based diplomacy, I would say. So value-based diplomacy, including respect for human rights, is one of the main crux of the foreign policies. So as you know, in the Washington Declaration last April, and together with Camp David one in the August, right? Both of them include the human rights issues. So that those two summits, the Biden and the Yoon, as well as those three summits of the Korea, Japan, and US, was highlighting for importance of the human rights issues. But I think they still, including South Korea and US, should give a more detailed strategies or detailed policy, what they can do to promote the human rights issue in their foreign policy agenda. Because I heard a lot of sayings, but I haven't seen yet for any specific policies or actions from the government. But I think the Korean government tried to do something, and they want to begin with North Korea. But including myself, we tried to say, if we only talk about North Korea alone, then we won't be able to take out the North Korean human rights issue of the ghetto. Because speaking of the North Korean issue, North Korean human rights issue, only small number of people were interested in, right? So that I think it's very important for us to talk about the human rights issues from the perspective of the universal value on one hand. But on the other hand, I think it's very important to prove why human rights issues and security concerns are directly and indirectly linked to each other. So currently, at least for the past the couple of months, if not some several months, the Yoon government started highlighting those two North Korean human rights issues and security threats are two sides of the same coin. So like including our foreign ministers and the ambassador to the United Nations and myself, that we just aligned with our voices to highlighting those two issues. So I think the human rights issue is a bit more concrete in South Korean foreign policies than the United States, at least for now.
Well, Ambassador Lee, one of the things that I think you're doing particularly well, and I think the Yoon administration as well, is giving an Asian voice to universal values in a way that the United States has sometimes trouble communicating. As you point out, the differences between democracies and authoritarian governments in the Indo-Pacific, but very important at Camp David and elsewhere for Japan and South Korea, with their Asian culture, to talk about, no, these are issues that really are universal at the end of the day, even if we have to be pragmatic and think about our own historical values and traditions. But let me ask you about how this is received within South Korea, with ordinary Koreans, and your students even at Korea University. When I'm thinking about the outlandish claims that are made every day by the Kim regime in the state media in North Korea. The happiest women in the world. That didn't sound like the women you were describing. Gender equality, the dignity of the common man. South Korea only helps elites, and you're thinking, well, wait, there's no dynasty that's been ruling South Korea since its inception. That's the North Korean problem, not South Korea. So given the gap between the claims and the actions of North Korea, is this widely understood inside South Korea, and even, again, your students at Korea University who are above average?
I don't think I can generalizing my students, so I have to be very careful. By the way, although I'm ambassador, my salary still comes from my university. I'm still a full-time professor, so I have no meanings to provoke my students, right? But let me put it this way, however. I think Korean society is so divisive, right, in many ways. I think that might begin with our perception about North Korea, or perception about Japan, and perception about the United States. But I hate to mention about the term progressive wings and conservative wings, but I couldn't find any better word to define the Korean opinion. So when you say what is the South Korea's opinion, I don't think I can generalize, because there are just very big split among them. So those who in liberal or progressive terms, who are supportive of the previous government, they think in order to improve the human rights condition or the inter-Korean relationships, we have to make a more engagement with the Kim Jong-un regime, right? That there they just highlighting humanitarian aid alone. And then they think they just try to translate those humanitarian aid as the human rights. And also they think we have to put more emphasis on our emulation of the relation with North Korea rather than Japan and other or allies. So I think that is their wings. But conservative wing, who is represented by the current administration, we just believe the humanitarian assistance is important, but as a means to improve the human rights or basic right of the ordinary North Korean people within North Korea, particularly vulnerable groups. At the same time, I think we appears to more highlighting for accountability for the Kim Jong-un regime who commit all those egregious human rights abuses as well as all those nuclear development. So just going back to your question, I think it is very hard to define what is South Korea's overall stance. And if you ask me about the Korean students, I'm sure, I didn't ask around, but I'm sure they also have a similar like a divide, but still they are clever enough not to raise their voice in front of the professors.
That's very different from American students, but okay.
But still, if I can give you some trends, I think they are very busy with looking for some opportunity to get better job opportunities. So therefore, I see more conservative stance rather than the progressive stance compared to 10 to 15 years ago, if I may say so.
Yes. The United States finally has a special envoy for human rights as of this last month. Is that helping? And what else does the United States need to do to support what the administration is trying to do here with your portfolio of issues that cover, everything from human rights to thinking about the connections to denuclearization?
Okay. Well, to begin with, I love her. She's wonderful.
Julie Turner.
And she's young, but she got a lot of big support already from NGO community because even from her early career, she's been very much engaging with NGO community. Henry Song, you should know, how good she is. Only reservation I have for her is, she's 5'9" height, very tall, right? And she's still wearing about a 10 centimeter high heel. So yesterday when we were in the inauguration ceremony together, I'm wearing high heel, assuming I'm gonna meeting her this late afternoon, right? But I was wearing sneakers and she was wearing high heel. So I just look like I am a one head short. That's the only reservation I have. But she's young enough to walk around with those 10 centimeter high heel. I just always tease her, but not me. But anyway, I'm so glad she has about some 5 mandate, including her mandate plus that's her wish list, including identifying some of those accountabilities. And she wants to engage with the separate families, and then also she wants to make sure for like the China is not forcefully repatriating those peoples. Those 5 things, but that 5 item didn't include the security and refugee nexus. But yesterday we had an opportunity to talk together at the CSIS, but she was very clearly talk about what I said today. So she said she want to work with Korea and like-minded countries to find out what kind of nuclear and nuclear developments on one hand and the human rights on other have related to each other. So she said she's going to close working with us. So I'm glad that we can work together for the both issues. And hopefully, if we can work together for making some kind of verifiable connection between the nuclear testing and radioactive exposure, I think that will be one of the very big achievement for us to raise international awareness. So that is one thing I would like to do with her. And another thing, actually, we already started to discuss from the very beginning of her appointment 2.5 weeks ago. I proposed she and I and Elizabeth Salmon, who's a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights, should make a joint statement. If it's too strong, and at least we can make an expression of concern about those forced repatriations. But Elizabeth Salmon, she already have her own expression of the concern with the other UN Special Rapporteurs, and then she cannot work with specific individual countries like US and the US. So that only left me and Julie, that means US and the US. So I suggested whether Julie can do together. And she welcomed my idea, but she gave me even better opinions. That means if we only, two of us can only do it, that might invite the strong position from China. So therefore, it's better for us to solicit more international support by having like at least a dozen of like-minded countries support. So we already have several support, and we are still working on it. So hopefully within 1 week or so, we'll make a joint statement. So I think this is focusing on those refugee issues alone, but I think this practice, she and I can just continue to make, maybe even with those denuclearization, non-proliferation, and the human rights nexus as well.
Well, that sounds promising. When I think about Xi Jinping coming to San Francisco and the possibility of a very long agenda but not enough time or maybe political will, nonetheless, North Korea has to be an important subject there. When you think about, yes, China doesn't want to hear any criticism about repatriating North Koreans back to North Korea, so you have to be quiet. They must be concerned about what Russia might transfer to North Korea, because that could be ultimately extremely destabilizing right on their border. The radiological disaster that's happening sort of in plain sight in North Korea is not far from the Chinese border as well, and must be a concern to the Chinese. So there must be issues on which the Chinese would, at least in theory, be willing to cooperate.
Actually, that's what it is. Like a forced repatriation issue, because to China, all North Korean escapees, with no exception, is illegal economic migrants. So based on the bilateral treaty between DPRK and China, they said they return them to their own country. And they kept saying same things. Based on domestic law, international law, and humanitarian law, they return them to the North Korea. So it is very hard to negotiate. But that radioactive exposure thing, because of their geographic proximity, I think we have some rooms to negotiate with China if we can having a verifiable fact. That's why it's very important for me to make interdisciplinary efforts. As I said in my presentation, on not only like political scientists like us or policymakers, but medical doctors who tend to be very conservative when they diagnose the disease, and also statisticians. Because I have a good colleague who are working with statistics. When I asked him for feasibility, I got a big hurdles in the very first place. She said, Shin-wha, you gave me a very credible X variables. But what is Y? So you means they are contaminated or not? I need answer. Therefore, I can make an analysis. So that is kind of a stuck what I did. But I can tell you, there are 34,000 North Korean escapees now settled down in South Korea. Out of it, 1,000 plus came from the Gilju County. That's where the nuclear site, the Punggye-ri Gilju site is the nuclear site. So this year, actually only in the end of November, if not early December, the first test we already made for 89 escapees from that area had a medical test whether they are contaminated or not. So, and then the Ministry of Unification promised to the public that every single year they will make that kind of the test experiment as well, so that we will see what will be the outcome. And hopefully, if we find some positive correlationship, I think that will be the one of the very beginning we discuss about it. Here, Patrick, I want to say one thing. Global media, when they are covering North Korea, they tend to focus on missile, nuclear test, and Kim Jong-un's personal story. what his daughter was wearing, Christian Dior, or what kind of watch the Kim Jong-un wears, right? I don't even remember what was it. But so instead of that, I think they have the highlighting, at least they give out equal portions to those egregious human rights abuses about North Korea. So I think those things is a global, we need a global media. And for that, I think role of the US is very important. Because I'm always on the newspaper these days, in Korean newspaper. So, that gave me a big challenge. Because these days you talk and then say goodbye, then you go to another places, you talk about the same thing, then it's no problem, right? But here we are living in the digital society, and even this one is taped, right? So I cannot talk same thing on and on, right? So every time I have to say something else. So that's tough. But what I'm saying is, those global, but that is a Korean media. The global media is not much interested in. Like for instance, BBC, and I was interviewed about 1 hour plus, but they only cover for 2 minutes. but that happens. But still, I think a global media's attention is very much necessary to promote and internationalizing North Korean human rights issues, as well as the North Korean issue in general.
Well, there is something called K-Wave, and there's something called think tanks at Hudson that also presumably play a role. I'm thinking now of the movie Beyond Utopia, which was just screened at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think Sumi Terry was there and others. Pastor Kim, I think, was there, and this is a documentary about Pastor Kim trying to help defectors. So is it possible for the arts and for think tanks and for civil society also, beyond the media, to play a big role?
I'm glad you mentioned about it. I've been meaning to tell and I just forget. Beyond Utopia, unfortunately, I haven't seen it, but I would love to watch that. But actually, Julie Turner, as her one of the first official event, she would like to have that film event at the State Department together with me. But unfortunately, we weren't able to find the spots for this time, except her inauguration ceremony itself. But we can have that film event upon that, right? So that since I have to leave on Thursday morning, I won't be able to do it. But Julie is preparing for that again, sometime in December at the State Department. And now the cemetery was in Korea and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but I was here, so I wasn't able to join them. But it was in the big news coverage in Korea. But I think if Mr. Blinken or the President Biden watch that film, I do believe that their North Korean policy could be not necessarily completely, but at least substantially modified. Because I saw those clips, but it's very touching. So in that sense, I think it is very important we recruit some movie stars or some stars or some kind of series of the movies or like a shorts or documentary. We need that. Because if we talk about those things in academic or policy manners, we have 50 audience? But those things can solicit the millions people who would be interested in those issues. So I'm looking for the State Department is featuring that film, just like what our Ministry of Foreign Affairs did, so that can give us some big impact on the policy decision makers. But at the same time, hopefully that will be one of the beginning for us to having all those public and NGOs and others can galvanizing our efforts to making a more publicity to the dismal human rights condition of North Korea.
Well, I haven't seen the movie either, but my colleague Olivia Enos has written about it and said that she's been watching human rights for some time and she was still shocked by what she saw on the screen. So very impressive what they've done in this documentary, which is why it's winning awards as well as winning sort of hearts and minds. And I think this is sort of the point, which is that talking about these issues can be very important for keeping.
Maybe today, this afternoon, by help of Heli Song, who's present here, I'm gonna talk with the Korean American Society community right? What the Korean American community can do for those North Korean human rights issues. Maybe after my talk, maybe I'll shorten my talk, and you can show us the film over dinner. that might be the wonderful opportunity for us to think about.
So we could spend more time on the human rights, but as time is very short, I want to come back to the very important points you were making about the 3 or 4 fronts and the potential for a provocation, perhaps, out of North Korea. What is the concern? The South Korean government has already said that they speculate that more than 1 million rounds of artillery munitions have been sent to Russia. There's no compunction in North Korea from transferring other things to the Middle East if there's benefit for them. And meanwhile, there just could be a provocation that comes about because of the distractions that are happening elsewhere. What is the thinking in Seoul right now, especially in the Yoon administration, on the dangers that are present at the moment?
Okay. Here I have to be very clear, particularly it is taped. I have to switch my hat to professor's one. So this is the hat now I'm wearing as a professor.
As an analyst in government affairs.
Yeah. And also I'm not in a position to represent the government position, particularly in terms of those nuclear or traditional security or foreign policy issues, right? Particularly because I'm for now the ambassador on the North Korean human rights, although my major expert is on multilateral security issues. So, but as a professor, I can tell you that it is hard to measure what is the North Korea's intention. However, as long as the Kim Jong-un maintains his regime, I don't think there are no chance to see denuclearization. I think he wants to have an armed reduction negotiation with the United States rather than denuclearization. So in this sense, I think we have to get rid of our dream. I think we have to prepare for what strongly nuclear the North Korea try to do with United States, because they completely ignore the South Korea when it comes to those nuclear talk. That's why we call the 2018 the Pyeongchang Olympic is a kind of the political show of the North Korea's political show. We South Korea was completely deceived. That's my opinions. Therefore, I have a concern when Trump comes back. I think that will give more excitement and momentum for Kim Jong-un to do something with him. But for that, I think U.S. has to be very careful and cautious about what the North Korea really wants when it comes to the negotiation. And obviously, that shouldn't be denuclearization issues, but it will be the arms control or arms reduction issues. And I think that will even boost the strategic position of the North Korea. So having said that, I have to bring you to the traditional theory of international relations or international security. If those two allies within the alliance, if this is one alliance is stronger and another one is weaker, usually the stronger one is concerned about entrapment, right, inducement. On the other hand, the weaker ally was worrying about abandonment. But in the case of South Korea now, I think we worry about bypassing South Korea when they are dealing with those nuclear talks or they are dealing with China and others. So we still worry about abandonment problems. But on the other hand, I think we are also concerned about entrapment. Particularly, what if something happened in Taiwan? And what if the US asks us for help? And what if China wants to make the US efforts or US military capability dispersed both in Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula, while the Ukraine issues and the Israel-Palestine issue haven't been resolved, then there are 4 fronts we have to deal with. Then do you think we Korea say, well, the South Korea and the U.S. alliance mandate is only confined on the Korean Peninsula, so that we can't send any troops to the Taiwan? Can we say that? It might be hard. And what if the North Korea's military adventurism would like to take advantage over that complexity and then making some kind of a tactical strike on the Seoul or other places? So those things are very complicated. That's why I said deterrence against adversaries are important as always, but U.S. credibility should go further by giving us assurance, so that extended deterrence is necessary. That's always the Bob Einhorn yesterday mentioned about it, and stronger deterrence capability of the U.S. is required. Yes, that is required, and we do believe the U.S. is a trustworthy ally to us, but that capability is U.S., not Korea, right? That's why probably they are saying that the Korea itself has more rooms for us to increasing our defense capabilities as well, including the possibility of the issues I mentioned.
Well, I think you've underscored very important points there, and I think many Americans do understand, but maybe more should, Korea's situation, because North Korea is building up a nuclear arsenal now, tactical nuclear weapons with these close-range ballistic missiles, with tactical nuclear munitions in the front lines, all the way to the Hwasong long-range ICBM. And where does that leave South Korea in different scenarios? Mm-hmm. That's why the U.S. and South Korea have been working on the display of these strategic assets, right? The B-52 bomber and the SSBN in Busan and the Vandenberg ICBM launch. But as you say, we need to both keep moving in that direction. I want to come back in our last second here, really, just to ask you a final question about projecting ahead. I've mentioned already that we've had a very difficult time trying to reduce repression in North Korea, despite the ebb and flow of concern about human rights. We've had a difficulty in making sanctions slow down North Korea's still successful nuclear programs and missile programs. How does this unfold? I mean, where does this lead? How, in your vision, your positive vision, Shin-wha, where's the off-ramp, if there is one ever, for this?
Well, to make the sanctions successful, we have to close the door of the backyard. North Korean backyard the door is open, and then China is always trying to help them out, because I think if I'm a Chinese leader, I think they have a dilemma. On one hand, we want to persuade or pressure North Korea not to develop the nuclear weapons and try to come down with the military adventurism, right? Probably that's what they believe. That's why they try to having a proactive role in the six-party talks over the past 15 years or so, right? But as their competition with the U.S. becoming fierce, I think they found North Korea is a very necessary, how would I say, leverage for them to play with, right? Because if you have two options as the Chinese leader, on one hand, we need a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula or nuclear-free North Korea. Otherwise, that will invite nuclear domino phenomena, including Taiwan and Japan. I think that is the last thing China wants to see. That's why they try to do that way. But on the other hand, what if those things making North Korea is a weaker position, so that the North Korea become a very unstable society, and that can be unified by South Korea, so that in Amnok and Tuman River that is facing with North Korea, those Korean Peninsula is a U.S.-friendly country. I think that is another last thing they want to see, and they have to weigh. But at least for now, I think China give more weight on the second part. That's why they forcibly repatriate refugees, try to stabilizing the North Korea and also having a good terms with the good political terms with the North Korea. In that sense, I think North Korea is very shrewd and smart to play with the Russian card as well. I think they are also lucky as well because Russia needs North Korea as well. So that during the Cold War period, the North Korea was very adroit to play with the distant diplomacy between Russia, the Soviet Union and China. I think they play those role again now. And then those international regional circumstances make the North Korea in a better positions to play with it. So that is the kind of thing I concern about it. So we, South Korea, that's why we probably need not only public, but once again, I'm not in a position to speak for the South Korean government at this point. But if I'm a South Korean leader to talk about those issues, I think I need more like visible and also more short-term present or things to get from
some
the US.
inducement.
Or from US.
Yes.
Rather than the long-term or medium-term things.
Well, Shin-wha Lee, professor and ambassador, both, you have given us tremendous food for thought, and we are deeply grateful for your coming to Hudson Institute, for sharing your ideas. I'm going to have to go back and watch the tape because you've touched on so many different issues that it really is worth unpacking even your presentations. But unraveling human rights and denuclearization, you've given us a great start. So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the ambassador.
Thank you very much.